Pollster US 2020 is produced in cooperation with A4 Media. This episode was recorded Tuesday, October 27th. Please enjoy.
The American election is truly exciting, and it's only getting better now that we're so close to Election Day. For a European like myself, it's hard to keep track with everything that happens. Right now, for instance, early voting numbers are skyrocketing. COVID spikes in key states, and the conservative judge, Coney Barret, has just been confirmed by the Senate. This is the president's third appointment to the Supreme Court. Not bad for him, as it is a key issue to the president's conservative base. So yep, he delivered on that promise. But other things are happening too. Which is why today's show will focus on the current state of the election, on expanding the Biden map, on Trump's campaign, on the Republican Party's love affair with white voters, on Mike Bloomberg's money, and much, much more. In short, this podcast is about the Battle of America. My name is Sune Steffen Hansen. I'm a partner at Peterson Public Affairs Company and a former political advisor of the Social Democratic Party in Denmark. Joining me for an in-depth analysis about the U.S. election are Republican strategist from South Carolina, Chip Felkel, and Democratic strategist from Washington, D.C., Jim Arcadis. And of course, our great producer, Thomas Nørskov. Thomas, let's get the show started. Good morning, America.
Good evening, Europe.
How are you doing?
Very
fantastic.
Busy.
Very busy. Fantastic.
Fantastic. Very busy.
Bustling with excitement as we turn the page in American history.
There is a lot going on in your country for sure. And I just saw that the Senate today confirmed Coney Barret as the new Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
Give me a view on that, guys. Like, how did that go? How is that going to play into the election? I know from numbers that many conservative voters actually turn up to vote because this is the number one issue for them, that the president should appoint a conservative judge for the Supreme Court.
It's interesting because it is a very important issue for a lot of Republican voters. There may be some situations in tight races where now that they have their judge, Republicans aren't quite as and they are enamored with Trump. Will some Republicans feel less inclined in tight races to participate if the weather's bad, if there are other things? It does put a pretty conservative tilt to the Supreme Court. Of course, we've discussed the reaction to that. It's been discussed from the Democratic Party in terms of trying to balance it out and pack the court, their term. Or the term being used about that. That's been tried. We discussed that in the first episode. But I do think it is, there could be a case made to some hardcore Republicans in tight races where they're not enamored with the Republican incumbent, that what the hell, you've already got your judges and that's what you cared the most about. I don't know.
Well, so I think that's fascinating. Do you think that's really, I mean, the fact that you who've worked in this party for a while, like that's your first go-to thought. I mean, that's kind of news to me. I
think there's some.
Okay.
I don't think that makes a lot of people. I think I know we're going to talk about the U.S. Senate race here in South Carolina, but there's a certain element there that doesn't think the incumbent Republican is conservative enough. And he's now used up his usefulness, maybe in some of their minds when they don't like him for other reasons.
Sure.
And will that then cause them to stay home? Or at least vote for Trump, but maybe not vote for him.
Yeah. On the Democratic side, this is everything. You know, in a way, I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit before in previous episodes, but the sense of resignation that how dare they do this? How dare they force through this judge with such brazen hypocrisy in the face of breaking all sorts of norms and the rule of law, because they realize that this is everything that they could have gotten out of Donald Trump, is just incredible. And it is turning into a big motivating factor for a lot of base Democrats, not only to vote, which of course they are, and doing so in record numbers early, But also in terms of things like donations. Amy Coney Barrett got sworn in. The first thing I did, I went and gave $25 to Steve Bullock, who's a good centrist Democrat running for a Senate seat in Montana. It pissed me off.
I do think the backlash from this. Look, a lot of Republicans, a lot of the public. I don't remember seeing the breakdown on it because it probably was more by party affiliation. But there was a pretty significant number of American voters who did not think it was a good idea to ram this through.
Yes, with a but. So sorry to cut you off, but the one thing that's important there is when Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the now deceased justice on the Supreme Court, who was very liberal, passed away in late September, the number of Americans who thought we should wait till after the election was like 60-40. It was clear that people thought we should wait. But as the hearings went on and Trump nominated a specific person and people put a name to that face or that position, and Democratic congressional leaders started to signal, well, I don't think we're going to be able to stop this. And that was the clear message coming out of the Democratic Party. I don't think we can stop this, but you should be upset and you should go vote about it. Right? The numbers of people who thought that they should just confirm her and get it over with actually increased over the course of the last month. And it went from like 60-40 against to 50-50, or maybe even a little bit better. And a lot of that poll movement was amongst Democrats who had sort of said, well, okay, fine, let's just tear the Band-Aid off and get this over.
Very interesting. And I'm just a little bit curious because Biden has been asked earlier on whether he wanted to expand the number of seats in the Supreme Court. Has he commented on this?
Well, he fumbled it. He fumbled that a couple of times out the gate, and the Republicans really seized on it because he said he wasn't going to answer that, and he had his own opinions. And he finally got it right, I think, in that he believes that we ought to establish a 180-day commission to look at all the courts, not just the Supreme Court, but the circuit courts and so forth, in terms of how we've over-politicized the courts. Personally, I think it's a pretty good solution. I'm sure some of my brethren on the right would disagree, but I think he finally got the right answer to that.
All right,
but yes, I think that's right. But if you're listening to this, make no mistake about what's happened. The Republicans have usurped power on the courts in an extraordinarily anti-democratic and narrow-minded way, just because they could exercise that power. And it runs a very serious risk of backfiring on them. And so Chuck Schumer, who's the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, had a speech on the Senate floor last night or the night before, where he came out and said, it was right before her vote, I think. And Chuck Schumer comes out and said, if you're a Republican and the voters choose to give us, the Democrats, the majority in this chamber one day, we are never going to take you as credible opposition ever again. Right. And so that's the dynamic that has been set up with this.
It does. It sets a very bad precedent, in my view, as a Republican, that we ran this through. And the president has been, to make matters worse, the president has been so clear that he thinks this election is going to be rigged if he loses it. And he's been very open about the fact that he's planning on litigating this election if it's close, in which Barrett may then cast a ballot. She won't recuse herself. We know that.
She won't recuse herself. No way.
She will not. We know that. And it just sets a bad precedent, in my opinion. And I'm a guy who still considers himself a little C conservative. I think it's a bad move.
Okay, guys, it's always exciting to discuss the Supreme Court with you from a political point of view because, well, it just doesn't make sense in a European perspective. But very interesting. I just want to bring you to another topic then. Last week on Thursday, we had a debate between Vice President Biden and the president himself. How did that go out? How did that come around?
It was pretty boring.
That's what I thought too.
It was boring. Trump's advisors clearly said to him, you really screwed up the first debate where you kept pestering Biden and interrupting, and you kind of seemed like a jackass, so maybe you should dial it back. And there's no better testimony to the fact that Trump failed and lost the first debate by a wide margin than the fact that he totally changed strategy and how he was going to debate. And a lot of pundits jump in and say, oh, well, this is a new tone from the president. the guy's losing the campaign and he's flailing around trying to figure out how to not present himself as a complete and total jackass. And voters see through that because in some of the instant polling that came out right after the debate, like CNN put a poll out the next day that said voters still thought that Joe Biden won the debate by something like 11 points. And so that may just reflect vote choice at this point where we're so close to the election and people are just going to back their candidate and say that their candidate won. But at the end of the day, Trump fundamentally changed tactics of how he was going to approach this debate, and it still didn't really move anybody.
Well, he's just not good in any kind of constrained environment, and it showed. It's painful for him to actually not be able to put his jabs and one-liners in, and it is his persona, which unfortunately a certain segment of the population seems to think it's presidential. Biden had a better grasp of some of the issues. Trump was not able to kind of flail as he normally does or to attack. And I thought Welker did a much better job. The mic, I think, actually cutting off the microphone was an interesting twist when you have to go that far in a presidential debate to cut off the microphone so everybody can speak is a whole nother level of craziness.
Here's basically the metaphor for what happened the other night last week. It was like you had paid $200 to go see a Metallica concert, and they walk out on stage with a couple acoustic guitars, and they sit down. And like, we're gonna play you some ballads tonight.
Jimi Hendrix versus James Taylor. Is that a better?
Yeah. Everybody would get up and walk out, right? Yeah. Because that's not what they're there. The show that they're there to see isn't the one that they got.
No, it was way too European for me.
Yeah.
Jim.
Well, we're trying not to be the wide world of wrestling for you people, for God's sake. We're trying really hard.
Jim, you had an interesting perspective before we started the interview here about some voter observations about the debate.
Yeah.
Could you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So there's a well-known polling firm called Democracy Corps, which is headed by Stan Greenberg, who's a very famous pollster in American Democratic political history. If you remember your political history back to 1984, Stan Greenberg coined the famous term Reagan Democrats, which were these Democrats in suburban counties outside of Detroit who were going to go vote for Ronald Reagan, even though that they were registered members of the Democratic Party. And so Stan Greenberg and his firm conducted a dial test of the debate, which is basically you get a bunch of people to watch the debate and they're sitting there holding a physical dial. And when they hear something that they like, they turn it to the right. And when they hear something that they don't like, they turn it to the left. And basically, I'll cut to the chase just to say that every time Trump said obnoxious things like, we're rounding the corner on coronavirus, it's clearing up, which he did several times. You know, he can't divorce himself from this language that we're about to beat coronavirus, even though there are spikes all over the place. These sort of conflicted voters who were the subjects of the test were just absolutely disgusted, right? And then the second thing we learned is every time Biden talked about who he was, where he'd come from, his background, voters like that. And so the closing recommendations for the last week of this campaign are, keep hammering Trump on coronavirus. And voters are receiving so much information about so many different things that the one true thing that voters can still go back to is what they perceive these two men to be. And for Joe Biden, it's hardworking Joe Biden from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who's going to unite the country, right? And they know that Donald Trump is kind of this obnoxious buffoon. And that resonates with people. And people are just sort of sick and tired of the Trump show.
Well, the irony, we have coronavirus fatigue here in some ways, and the Trump people are counting on that, but people are still getting sick. I myself had a test yesterday. And I think while we're all tired of talking about it, it is a part of our life. And for the Trump people to continually suggest that it's no big deal, that we're turning the curve, is hurting him with, if there is anybody undecided, it's hurting. And I think it's hurting there's no logic to it. Not when you have when you're running out of hospital beds in certain key areas in the country.
And talking about this corona situation, it's actually been on every episode we've done so far because it's a very important issue
Yes.
for you guys, obviously, for all of us in different ways, but it plays into the presidential election right now. Where is it spiking specifically? I know Wisconsin, we talked about it earlier, that Wisconsin, which is a battleground state or should be, Joe Biden's doing pretty well there right now, but it's really bad there, right?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer here is that it is as bad across the country as it has ever been.
Correct.
Even so, over the summer we saw a spike, and we would get up to well north of 50 to 60,000 new cases per day. We're now at if not better, if not higher than that level of like 65,000 new cases per day, right?
Yeah.
And that's after 8-9 months
As I
dealing
call
with this stuff. Yeah, there's been no improvement, and so yeah, in key states like Wisconsin, across the Midwest, this has also been really driven by students going back to university and college, where there have been very little restrictions. They want to go out and party, and that leads to big spread. And this story is just not going away.
No. But it does have an effect on voters, especially certain segments like the seniors and those segments. So it has an effect for the election.
Absolutely. Trump's when pollsters ask, what do you approve or disapprove of how Trump has handled the coronavirus, he's 15 points underwater. Yeah. That means that 15% more disapprove of how he's handled it than approve. So he's basically in the low 40s for people who say that they approve of Trump's handling coronavirus, and he's in like the mid 50s for people who say they disapprove. And that's about going to reflect the vote total.
Yeah.
The real irony of this is that unless you get the coronavirus in check, the economy won't recover. And had Trump taken a different approach in January and not put his head in the sand, he would probably not be in the situation he's in today. But by his refusal to accept the seriousness of it early on, he created this situation for himself, and now he's just trying to wish it away. We have tremendous absentee voting and early voting around the country like never before. Every state has people voting early, and that in part is part of the coronavirus kickback or effect, because people aren't going to the polls; they are voting absentee, so they don't have to get out and take a risk of being infected.
During the last episode, we had 35 million people voting by mail. Right now, before a couple of hours ago, when I left my office, that was 64 million, almost 65 million. That's a crazy number.
We are at 47% of the national turnout for 2016.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And now we're going to surpass 2016 for sure. But basically half the country that voted in 2016 has already voted, and we still have a week before the election. You look at the state of Texas, over 80% of the 2016 vote total has already been achieved. Florida is in the mid 60s, about 2/3. Like it's insane.
How many of these voters by mail, absentee votes, as you call it, how many of those would be Republicans? Because you always had a feeling that like a lot of the Democratic voters would choose this option in a way of voting, but how many would actually be Republicans?
Well, traditionally, Republicans always run strong absentee ballot programs. That's always been a cornerstone of Republican campaign politics.
Because of the senior voters, right, Chip?
Yeah, part of it. That's exactly right. But in this cycle, the president was spending so much time telling everyone that absentee ballots were rigged or mail-in ballots were rigged that I think a certain segment, a small segment maybe, but there is a segment of those people who refuse to let their ballot be touched by the mail. So there's that scare tactics that was been effective watching Fox News and others. So I don't know of the people who have counted ballots. We'll know when it's all said and done. But I would think most of these votes are Democratic votes.
Yes, Democrats have definitely submitted more ballots absentee up to this point. But let's also not infer too much from that, right? Because Republicans are going to vote early in person and already are. And so the sort of insider terminology that we're talking about is blue shift and red shift, right? Blue shift has been this initial wave of enthusiasm among Democratic voters to get their ballot in as quickly as possible, to go vote as soon as possible because they hate Donald Trump and they want to make sure that their vote is in and they want to be able to track it. As we get closer to Election Day, more and more Republicans are going to go vote, right? Mm-hmm. And then I also think that there's one, base of the Democratic Party, which is Black voters. It's very important to understand how they're voting too. Because they are voting in greater numbers as a percentage of their voting block by going to vote in person early, right? And that's because they don't trust people. They have worked and fought for the right to vote for basically centuries. And with all of this stuff that Donald Trump is saying about how, we've got to slow down the mail, he's attacking mail-in voting, Black voters look at that situation and say, nope, not going to put it in the mail. I'm going to go drop my ballot off early.
And case in point, in the state of South Carolina, where the African-American vote is about 35% max, they'd already voted 30% as of Friday.
Oh, that's crazy. Guys, okay, this is a little bit what had happened since our last episode. I'm just going to bring us to part 2, where we're going to talk a little bit about the challenge of the Republican Party. Stay with us. Okay, friends, we're back. So, we got a senatorial campaign in South Carolina. Chip, just tell us a little bit about the background and what is happening right now, because it's crazy, right?
It is crazy. Just a little history. The incumbent Republican senator is Senator Lindsey Graham, who's seeking his 4th term. Former congressman, then a member of the U.S. Senate, was very close to Senator John McCain, sought the Republican nomination in 2016 as well, and like many other Republicans, was defeated by Trump. But during that process, he had a lot of very unflattering things to say about Mr. Trump. And then Trump won, and then the Republicans took the Senate, and he became Senate Judiciary Chairman. So now he's facing a very, very uphill battle, a very tight race, toughest race he's ever had, where his opponent has raised over now probably $97 million. Most of which has been spent, by the way. I learned yesterday, although he's raising about $1 million a day. But Graham is in a real fight, and it's a very interesting twist, because what the Democratic nominee, Jamie Harrison, has done is he's actually running ads attacking a third-party candidate, Bill Bledsoe, as being too conservative for the people of South Carolina. And what it's dastardly, cleverly done, but it's reminding alt-right, or I hate that term, but it's reminding very conservative voters who traditionally have not liked Graham that there's an alternative, that they can vote for this third-party candidate. Now, one problem is Bledsoe's not on the is out of the race. He's on the ballot, but he dropped out of the race. So Harrison is running ads saying that Bill Bledsoe's too extreme for South Carolina, with an appeal then to the hard right voters who aren't enamored with Graham. And it could be just enough where Bledsoe gets 5 to 7, 8% of those really, really hard right voters in this state that causes Graham to lose, because you only have to have a plurality, not 50+1 here.
That is brilliant. He's splitting the votes on the conservative. Yeah. Wow.
Chip, can you also talk about the Lou Dobbs effect?
Wow. Yes. Last Friday, Lou Dobbs is a well-known commentator, anchor for Fox Business here in the United States. Obviously, Fox, we know where their allegiances are. Dobbs and Graham have had a long, turbulent history with each other, particularly over the issue of immigration. However, Graham has been the #1 supporter of President Trump. So we were all a little bit surprised last Friday when Dobbs, in his commentary closing his show, attacked Graham and said basically he didn't deserve to be reelected. That may play into what I just described as well, because the people I just described were probably all watching Lou Dobbs last Friday night. It has the Graham people very concerned. Perfect example of illustrating that is that as we speak, as we're recording this, Vice President Pence is here in the upstate of South Carolina holding an event 16 kilometers from where I am in support of Senator Graham. So they are worried. It could be a tight race, and Graham may win it, but he just squeak it out.
Wow.
And The other thing on that is Graham has been going on Sean Hannity's show, like the number one conservative, arch conservative talk show host on Fox News, who has a primetime 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. slot, right? And he's basically, so after Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed to the Supreme Court, he went on and said, mission accomplished. He's trying to take a victory lap, and he's gone on several times, almost 3-4 times a week for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And he keeps saying, I'm getting killed in the money race. Please donate, please donate, please donate. And so I don't know what a surer sign is that he's running scared than those couple things Chip just talked about and this.
Okay.
And the thing about the hard right is they don't trust Graham.
Why is that? Why is that?
Because of his position previously on immigration, because he was so close to John McCain personally, who they viewed as a moderate Republican, that his bona fides have never been solidified. And he thought by supporting Trump as adamantly as he has, that he would win those people over. And it's clearly not happened. And this would be a big deal. If he was to lose this seat, it would be monumental in the history of the U.S. Senate and surprise and upset races. It certainly would be.
Because it is an amazing turn that he has taken from 2016 in the beginning until right now, where he's like so loyal to.
Well, he said he was a xenophobic bigot, and if the Republican Party nominated him, we'd get exactly what we deserved. And then he turned around and has been his most loyal cheerleader. His point would be, he beat me. He's the president. I'm trying to be helpful, and I can do the best for South Carolina if I have a good relationship with this president and this White House. Many people would say, yeah, but you've gone too far with that. And it may cost him. We'll see.
Well, amazing. It just underlines the fact that the GOP is very, very challenged during this election. So, and so talking about that, let's just look at some of the states that actually gone into play, the expanding Biden map, sort of saying that suddenly Biden would be able to compete in certain states. But before going there, I just want to hear what's the difference right now between the 2016 election and the 2020 election right now.
Jim?
What would you say is the major difference?
So at this point of the 2016 campaign, 11 days before, it was actually 4 years ago tomorrow, which, because the election was held on November 8th in 2016, was 11 days before the vote. Jim Comey, the former director of the FBI, came out and made an announcement that they were the FBI was reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. And this was a major shift because both candidates were so disliked in 2016 that there was something like 13 to 15% of the electorate that was undecided. Now it's only about 5% this year. So that's one difference. But 2016, triple that number were undecided. We saw, if you go back and look at it, a shift in the polling where all of a sudden voters, we saw in that last 10 days, voters started to move towards Trump a little bit. Now, you can say that the polls were wrong then and that the polls are off now, right? But if you are looking at the same poll over time, even if it is methodologically off, right? If you are comparing one poll, what it says today, to what it said in September, to what it said in August, right, to what it says in the last week of this election, you would see, in theory, a movement, which is what we saw in 2016. There was a movement towards Trump. We are now less than that 11 days. We are 6-7 days away from an election with half the electorate that is basically half the electorate plus that has already cast its ballots. And we're not seeing the polls move. There is no late movement towards Trump this year as there was in 2016. And so the polls have consistently showed nationally an 8-9 point lead for Biden. And the Republicans are now throwing everything in the kitchen sink at Joe Biden, including ridiculous accusations about him making money overseas and his son being a drug addict and all this other stuff. And none of it's sticking and none of it's moving the polls in any sort of significant way whatsoever.
So if you look at it from a GOP Republican perspective, there's a certain stability right now, which should be alarming to them.
Terrifying, alarming.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not seeing that movement. It's baked in. Trump support is kind of baked in. I mean, I've seen one pundit say that you usually can count on the vote with your favorability. Whatever your favorability rating is, is kind of what an incumbent will end up getting in an election like this. There's only one pollster out there who's consistently made the case that they're showing some movement. It's the group that did make some wise predictions, if you will, back in 2016. He works off the theory of the social desirability basis that people aren't willing to tell pollsters that they're supporting Trump. I'm not sure if I buy it. We'll know next week. He still maintains that he's got a better angle on it than a lot of other pollsters. But I think it's different.
I'm just a little curious. How would he measure? Because I actually think this is very interesting.
Well,
I do think there are a lot of voters that won't tell what they're voting if it's Trump. We've seen this in Europe too with the right-wing populist movement. So I'm just a little curious about how do you measure that?
Well, it's the same. He uses kind of a neighbor's question in there about, well, if people won't tell you how they feel, would he ask a question in terms of, what do you think? Who do you think most of your neighbors are going to vote for? And then they use an algorithm to merge that. And it was a successful endeavor for them 4 years ago. I think one of the differences is that Trump was an unknown quantity, really, in 2016. He had this Myrtle Beach classy thing going. If
you're not from South Carolina, you might not get that Myrtle Beach reference.
Sorry, I've been wanting to use that line forever.
Just explain it. Help us understand South Carolina.
Glitz. Like the gold laminated everything and showy and everything. As a success, he has this imagery of a successful businessman, and there is a certain amount of people in the Republican Party that believes government should be run like a business. I mean, that's kind of their cornerstone. And so give him a chance. But what they've seen now, and why I don't think we're seeing this movement, is I think his support is baked in. We saw what his personality was like as a president. I'm more concerned as a Republican in terms of what he does to down ticket races around the country.
Just explain down ticket races.
Well, U.S. Senate, congressional races, even state house and state Senate, although I don't know if he has much of effect there. But certainly outside the presidency, the U.S. Senate, the House, the Congress, where we're probably going to lose 15 seats. It looks like we may very well lose the Senate as well. And you made a reference earlier about the future of the Republican Party. I'm not sure what direction we go. Demographics are not in favor of the GOP as the country changes. And we have not adapted to that. By nominating Donald Trump, we did not adapt to that. We blew out an autopsy that was done in 2012 that said, that was very clear of the actions that as a party we needed to take to be able to appeal to the changing demographics of this country. And we completely threw it in the wastebasket with the nomination of Donald Trump. So long term, if we do get our heads handed to us here next week, there's going to have to be a complete regrouping, rebuilding of the party to be able to appeal to the changing demographics in this country.
Okay, let's just have this discussion because it's actually kind of interesting. There's no doubt about the Republican Party being the white man's party. You're doing very well with the segment of the voters that are all, basically white. And the majority of voters will stay like that for many years, although the numbers will go down rapidly, I understand. But even in 2060, you will have a majority of white voters in the country, as far as I can see in the projections. So why is this a bad strategy? Because it seems like you're pretty good at mobilizing white voters, and it will still have a majority many years to come anyway.
I think we're losing with the growing. Look, it's all about the margins in certain races, and we're not appealing to younger voters. We're not appealing to Asian voters. We're not appealing to Hispanic voters. With the immigration positions that Trump has taken, we've probably lost a segment of the Latino population for at least a decade. We do have in this particular, and what will be interesting in this particular election, we just did a U.S. Census, and we will redraw legislative lines going forward, where some of those lines may be more favorable to R's versus D's or D's versus R's. And so this is a big election, not just for the presidency, but as those legislative lines are drawn at the state house, state senate, congressional level, it will greatly affect the party's ability then to win elections if those lines aren't drawn favorably. That's a whole nother issue and hard to explain, gerrymandering and everything else. Look it up. But as a party, whether it's on healthcare, where we said we had a solution, but we haven't offered one. We hate the ACA, Obamacare, but yet we haven't offered a solution.
I've heard it's coming in 2 weeks, though.
It's coming in a couple of weeks, but I mean, that's where we've got to become the party of. We can't. The GOP, unfortunately, allowed itself to get in a position. Things.
Sure.
And that has to change.
Chip, can you repeat that? The sound, something happened with the sound. Sorry.
The Republican Party has allowed itself to become the party that is primarily against things and not for solutions. And being against everything, it does not grow your party. And we can be for things that are good solutions, that are common sense, smart government, good use of tax dollar solutions, as opposed to just saying no, no, no to things as the demographics in this country change.
So typically when I'm deeply involved, so like when we're talking about my football team, right? And somebody tells me what's wrong with my football team, I really hate that because I study my football team all the time. But from an outsider's perspective, I'll tell you what I think is wrong with the Republican Party. So to your point, Suna, look at states like Georgia and Texas and maybe North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, right? There is only one reason, especially why Georgia and Texas and Arizona are competitive this year, and it's demographics. They have large Latino populations, and they're growing. Georgia has a large black population, and the Republican Party just doesn't appeal to them. They don't. It's not even that the Republican Party doesn't appeal to blacks and Latinos. It's that the Republican Party has nothing, like not even anything to offer them. Now, Trump has made direct appeals, particularly to black men and Latinos who hate communist dictators like Chavez and Castro, and will pick up a few points here or there. And really tries to play up the macho thing to black men and will pick up a few points here or there. But that's not a long-term solution, right? The dichotomy that's playing out is as the Republican Party realizes that it doesn't have very much to be for, what they're trying to do is change the rules of the game to exclude voters who don't like them. It's that simple. Voter suppression and litigation and trying to toss out ballots is a cornerstone of Trump's campaign strategy. And that's a really terrible way to go because A, it's not sustainable, and B, it only repels people further over time and could throw the country into some serious post-election turmoil.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand this, and everything looks like that Trump will actually lose. So it's I understand the complexity of this, but I've just also kind of, like everybody else, I've been thinking about how did this man win, and I came to the conclusion, as many others, that this cultural war thing that you have in the U.S. actually benefited him, and he was able to mobilize a bunch of voters that otherwise felt disenfranchised. And if he has that luck to do that again during this election, which he might do in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and other places, he could suddenly appeal he could redo the map, sort of saying that my beloved blue wall would actually turn more red, but then he would, the Democrats would eventually get Texas. I understand, but so losing some for the Republican Party might also meaning winning other parts. Does it make sense?
Yeah, but we're not seeing that, right? We're not seeing that. Trump won Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan because of a fluke. Right, there was a third party candidate, and and his opponent, his main opponent, Hillary Clinton, was historically disliked. Like he just picked the right race at the right time and figured out a way to capitalize on that. And
Trump could have easily run from an ideological perspective. Trump looked at the GOP and saw, because he has that's one of my big problems, I guess, as a Republican and him being the titular head of the party, is that there's no history in Donald Trump's life to suggest that he's really a Republican or a Democrat. And it was easier to beat 17 Republicans than it was to beat Sanders and Clinton for the nomination. And so he decided to go that way. He'd actually made a statement many years earlier that if he ever ran, he'd run as a Republican because Republican voters were dumb. Well, I guess we are. I guess many of our voters are. he did. It was a fluke in that he got elected because Clinton was universally disliked. There was a group of people out there that felt disenfranchised, unheard, that Republicans had been telling them for years they were going to do certain things and then not doing it in the primary process. I'm not here to say that that the Republican Party will recover post-Trump anytime soon, because I don't think this just goes away in our national politics immediately with or without Trump.
No.
Well,
no, it's going to linger, especially if Trump, decides to build a media empire afterwards. And why wouldn't he?
yeah, exactly. So let's just look at some of Biden's potential here, because let's talk about Georgia and Texas. They're not exact. Well, Georgia's a toss-up state or a swing state right now. I think it's categorized by most pundits to be like that. Texas is leaning red for the Republican Party, but is a place where the Democrats believe that they might have a chance to actually win eventually. Still, I have a hard time seeing Georgia and Texas, two in my view, very conservative states, vote Democrats for the next many years. What do I miss something?
But I think if you look at Georgia, I actually ran the Bush Quayle campaign in the state of Georgia in 1988. And in that year, 41 beat Dukakis. It was the first state called. I started drinking way too early. But that state was very much still outside of Atlanta, still very much a Democratic state. I think when you look at the state of Georgia, you have to realize there's 5 million people around Atlanta, and then there's the rest of Georgia. So it is we've talked about Florida being multiple states. There's Atlanta, and then there's the rest of Georgia. If you look at Texas, there's Austin, Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, and then there's the rest of Texas. Now, a lot more people live in those areas. We're seeing unbelievably close numbers and surprising numbers in the presidential race in both of those states. You're seeing two Senate races taking place in the state of Georgia right now, where it looks like in the special election, the Democrat Warnock may actually have a chance of winning it without a runoff,
crazy.
Which is unbelievable. We've talked already about South Carolina. I haven't seen any late numbers on Cornyn and MJ Mahar in Texas, but I don't think that's. I
think Cornyn's going to pull that out by 4 or 5 points.
But this is, unfortunately for my party, I believe, the effect of Donald Trump. And that is why, for all of his syncopacy and his prophetic comments earlier, Lindsey Graham was right, because there's a trickle-down effect that the Republican Party is going to have to figure out a way to recover from to be a long-term part of this process in this country if we get beat like a lot of experts are saying we're about to get beat.
Do you know where Joe Biden is today, right now?
He's home, isn't he?
No, in Delaware, in the basement.
He's in Warm Springs, Georgia.
Ah, yes.
Do you know what Warm Springs, Georgia is? It's a place where, was it Truman or FDR? I want to say
FDR. FDR because of his polio.
Yeah, went to convalesce at the end of his life, and died in Warm Springs, Georgia. Right?
I went there to convalesce. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We'll edit that out. But the point is, and so the point is that there's a lot of symbolism over Biden going there. This link to the best known and sort of stalwart Democratic president, right? But also Joe Biden's in Georgia.
I think it says a lot. I think it says a whole lot.
At the very beginning, Chip said, pay attention to where these guys spend their time in the last couple of days. Joe Biden's in Georgia.
Yeah, that is amazing.
That means
Mike Pence is in South Carolina.
Mike Pence is in South Carolina. Donald Trump's in Pennsylvania. Like that said, your only two assets at this point are time and money, right? And you've got to spend something. You've got to be somewhere, and where you are shows where you think you're in trouble or where you think you have opportunities. And right now, the Trump people are telegraphing that they're on defense, and the Biden people are telegraphing that they're on offense.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think it is. And they'll make some changes too. I think We haven't seen what their travel schedule is quite yet for the next 5-6 days, but there'll be some abrupt changes that are made there with some very haggard, young, ambitious, advanced men and women who are going to be landing at an airport somewhere. And as soon as they land, they're going to be told to grab another flight and go somewhere else to go prep for an event that just got put together in the last 2 hours.
On that note, I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Connor Goddard, who's probably doing that right now.
Right.
Okay. But like, what if you see news of Joe Biden going to Texas in the next couple of days? Watch out. I think Biden's going to Iowa. Is that on the schedule, or did I make that up?
I didn't see it.
I was in a play.
Sorry?
Iowa is in a play. Like he could take Iowa.
Very much so. Yeah.
But I think the point about that, though, look, is that not only is Iowa, Iowa's in play, but guess what else is in play? A U.S. Senate seat. A U.S. Senate seat is in play in South Carolina with Graham. 2 U.S. Senate seats are in play in the state of Georgia. A U.S. Senate seat is in play in the state of North Carolina with Cunningham and Tillis. And I think Cunningham's still slightly ahead there. Mike Espy in the state of Mississippi against Cindy Hyde-Smith. I think that would be an amazing, incredible loss for the Republicans. She's a terrible candidate, but Mike Espy is a well-known, well-respected African-American, former congressman, served in a Clinton administration, I believe, at HUD or something like that, in the business community in Mississippi. But that would be the ultimate, to have 2 African Americans get elected from Mississippi and South Carolina to the U.S. Senate.
That would be very symbolic. Absolutely.
Would be very symbolic.
And so look, now we talked a little bit earlier about late movement in the polls. These are some of these Senate races or congressional races that people don't really pay attention to that closely, where the number of undecideds a week out will be higher. Instead of 5% from a Trump versus Biden perspective, maybe now you're looking at 10% in the Senate race where people don't really know the candidates that well. Look to see how those votes are breaking in the last week. Because if you see movement towards a guy like Mike Espy or Warnock, we have seen movement in the state of Georgia towards Warnock in the last week or so. It was a preacher.
Part of that's cannibalism, though. Part of that's cannibalism with Loeffler, who was appointed to the Senate seat, and Doug Collins, who is a congressman. Yeah. So there's part of that as well.
So, guys, we have to wrap it up soon. I just want to hear something, because I know Mike Bloomberg is actually throwing in quite a lot of money for the Biden campaign, or anyway, against Donald Trump. And he is investing in the state of Ohio, and he's investing in the state of Texas right now. Why those 2 areas, Jim?
Because Mike Bloomberg has basically inexhaustible resources. He can pay for whatever he wants, anywhere he wants. And he had his pollsters look at those 2 states and said Biden's best 2 pickup opportunities they thought were in Ohio and in Texas. And so even though we've seen like 80% of the state of Texas as compared to the 2016 electorate already vote, they think, if you're undecided, if you're that even 5% of people in Texas who are undecided, and you get a bunch of negative ads saying Trump's a terrible person who doesn't care about solving this coronavirus problem, that can have an impact.
Yeah.
So, Chip talked about at the margins earlier, and like this is at the margins. If they can find a couple thousand, 10,000, 20,000 more votes in the state of Texas, hold on to your hat.
Late deciders, late, and it's hard to believe people haven't decided, but it can play a role with the right messaging at the last minute.
Yeah. Guys, thank you so much for another good discussion. We'll be back 1 week after the election with a summary of what happened. We'll dive down to in the numbers, look at what actually happened with different voters' perspectives and how the campaign performed in different states. So far, I want to say thank you to you, Republican strategist Chip Felkel from the Felkel Group in South Carolina, and Democratic strategist Jim Arcadis from Electica, right?
Electica, yeah.
Electica, yeah, okay. Democratic strategist Jim Arcadis from Electica in Washington, D.C. It was great to have you both here.
Thank you.
Well, aren't you going to ask us for final predictions?
Yes, I am going to actually ask you one final prediction. So what will happen? Come, bring it on.
Okay. You want me to go first or Chip goes first? Okay.
Go ahead.
I think Biden carries Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I think Trump throws a temper tantrum about Pennsylvania and sues and tells them to stop counting the votes, and I think that it's going to be horrible. Out of North Carolina and Florida, I think that they'll split those. I think Biden's got a pretty good shot in Florida, maybe a little bit better shot in Florida than he does in North Carolina. And then we get into this next layer of Georgia, Ohio, Iowa, Texas. Oh, and Arizona. We forgot about Arizona. I think Biden's going to carry Arizona. I think Biden's going to win Arizona. And so basically but out of those other states, I think that out of Georgia, Ohio, Iowa, and Texas, Biden maybe picks up one of them. Certainly, I'd be very hard pressed to think it's all four. But basically, Biden rebuilds the blue wall, picks up one of the toss-ups, adds Arizona, and picks up one of the reach states. So basically what that amounts to is a significant Biden win in the Electoral College, but Trump's not going to take it lying down. And I'm actually quite worried about the state of the country in the days and weeks afterwards, because I think it'll be very ugly.
If it's that clear, it's going to be hard to challenge.
The bigger the landslide, the easier we're going to move past this as a country. But
yeah, Chip, what do you think?
My biggest fear, as I've said all along, is that I'm afraid it will be close, and we'll litigate this. While I was involved in 2000 in counting Chads in Florida, I know what that put the country through, and I hope we can avoid something like that over again. I think Biden may win Georgia, but not Texas. I think Florida and not North Carolina. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Biden, Pennsylvania, I don't know. But I do think they lose the Senate. They lose 20 seats in the House. Republican. I'm not very optimistic whatsoever from a Republican perspective. And I'm afraid we end up in major litigation. But I do think Biden ekes it out.
Pollster US 2020 is made in cooperation with A4 Media. Find us on Libsyn, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or where you usually find your podcasts. If you like this podcast, please remember to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and remember to subscribe in your podcast app. Thank you for listening.